So hi everyone, and welcome to this panel, which we have proudly called From Erg to Aha, where we're going to be talking about driving product adoption through effortless self-service experiences. So why the Erg? Well, I think up until now, driving adoption has always been perceived as rather long-winded and a painful experience for lots of different reasons. And why the aha? Well, that's what we're here to explore together. So I'm Sue Nabbits-Moore, an unconditional evangelist of customer success and co-founder of Success Chain. And we're really excited today to be joined by our wonderful aha panelists who are going to be sharing their insights around this topic. So this is one of a series of thought leader events. And we're really pleased to be joined and to have been invited by the AHA Zoomin team. So thanks, and we're really excited to be on this panel with you today. So just for information, this session will be recorded, so you will have access to it afterwards. You'll see that there is a chat function, so please go ahead and chat away. And there is also a question and answer space, so please put your questions there. And what we'll do at the end of the session, we'll be selecting, and you'll be able to vote, so we'll be selecting some of the top voted questions. So that's about it. So now let's get right into the nitty-gritty, and I'm going to ask the wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. So could you just, for the purposes of time, just tell us your name, your role, and your company, and then we'll get into the subject. Okay. So, ladies first. Megan, let's start with you, please.
All right. I am Megan Gilhooly. I am VP of Customer Experience here at Zoomin. Very excited to be here.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And now we'll go over to you, Mike.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Sasaki. I lead the customer success and support team at Mitek, and I'm ex-Oracle. Peter, good to see you here.
Yeah, that's a great transition, isn't it? So
it is.
Thanks,
Hi, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Peter Armley. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Success Enablement for North America, but I work on a small global team that's standardizing the enablement across the globe for Oracle.
Fantastic. Welcome aboard, all of you. Now, just to introduce the subject today, we're first of all going to start off with the what and the why. What exactly do we mean by a self-service adoption? And why is this essential for customers? Why is this essential for vendors? And then we're going to be having a deeper dive into the how. How do you actually implement a self-adoption culture? What does this imply in terms of cultural change, perhaps new frameworks, new processes, new tools, new skill sets? And then the last section, we're actually going to analyze whether or not the introduction of self-adoption efforts are actually bearing their fruits. And we're going to be seeing, whether that's had any impact in, first of all, helping your customers, and then what is the impact as you as a vendor. Okay, so let's dig deep. Okay, so first of all, I think over the last years, we're seeing a shift. And I think that self-adoption is viewed both by vendors and customers differently now, right? So compared to several years ago. So the first question, and this is for you, Megan, ladies first again. You're the only lady on the panel, Megan, so that's it, right?
I'm in luck.
Yes. So what is your vision for a self-service product adoption?
So I think when we talk about self-service adoption specifically, we're not only talking about enabling customers to help themselves through our product, but we're also talking about mechanisms and maybe like gamification and other things that really entice them and engage them so that they actually will adopt the self-service tools that we're building. So that's kind of how I see self-service adoption specifically.
I love that. And what about you, Mike? Would you agree with Megan? Would you like to add something about your vision of what you have
Yeah,
been doing as well in MyTech? Yeah.
sure. 100%
Mhm.
agree. I think
Mhm.
one thing that she said that was super important was enablement. So when I think of self-service, I think of customer enablement, and that's where we've evolved.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be 100% self-service. It's my vision of it is it's more of a hybrid. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but the hybrid allows the customer facing team like CSMs to elevate themselves and the work that they do so that they're actually doing the work that they were hired to do.
I
That's my vision at a high level.
Yeah, I love that because this word enablement, in fact, has two purposes: enablement for the customer and enablement for those customer success teams. So I really love that. Now, Peter, I'm going to ask you now. How have you seen that this is different from the vendor-led adoption efforts, and what have you seen at Oracle around that?
So I was going to add to that other question, but that's fine.
Yes, please do.
No,
Please go ahead.
I was gonna joke
Yeah.
that I 100% disagree with my
Oh,
co-panelists. But no, I 100%
well, we'd
agree
love
with you.
you to. We'd
No,
love you to say that.
the only thing I would add is that
Mhm.
for self-service product adoption, I think the vision should be, at least for me, anyways, that it's the default for customers. That's
Mhm.
that's the first thing that they do or encounter or interact
Mhm.
with the vendor. So that's kind of my vision.
Mhm.
But of course, as Mike kind of implied, there's all kinds of things underneath that to make
Mhm.
it happen through humans, actually. So
Yes.
the vendor-led adoption efforts, how's it different from vendor-led adoption efforts? I would say primarily it's consistency across the board is maybe that's a vision itself, but I think that's what it should be. It's time saving for the customer. And broadly speaking, it's reliable.
Mhm.
Of course, we all have our horror stories. But I would say, generally speaking, it's getting better and better all the time. So reliability, consistency, and time saving, I think, are what distinguishes it from a vendor-led effort, which suffers on those fronts, I
Yeah.
think.
Okay. Fantastic. No, I agree with that. Um, and there was an interesting statistic, and it was a recent one by Gartner, which predicts that by next year, 2022, 85% of customer service interactions will actually start with self-service. I think that speaks for itself, those
Yeah.
stats, right? It's a massive shift, right? What are your experiences around what you've been seeing in those shifts? So let's start with you, Mike, please. What have you seen, and how has this self-service adoption evolved at MyTech?
Yeah, so self-service adoption, I would say, I don't know, years ago, it was more about the vendor
Mm-hmm,
and more about operational costs and savings and things like that. And that was the
mm-hmm,
ROI. But I think with the evolution of software and the evolution of how customers interact with companies, the realization is that you can actually improve the customer experience.
Mhm.
Not
mm-hmm.
everyone wants to talk to a human, right?
Yeah.
And at least in the very beginning, you could filter to the human that can help you, and you can
Mm-hmm.
do that through self-service. And so that's really the evolution, and it's going to keep getting better and better. So it's pretty exciting when you think about self-service, and it's more customer-centric than it's ever been.
I love that. And have you actually seen any stats at MyTech which prove that the customers actually want to get on with it by themselves and they don't necessarily want to be handheld?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we're all customers, right?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
we know what it's like being a customer. And so when a company is not customer centric, it's really strange
Mm-hmm.
because we've all been customers at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And daily, really. So, we use feedback from customers, NPS surveys, feedback during onboarding. That's a really great time to hear from a customer because it's a very emotional period when
It
they're
is.
onboarding, and they'll tell you how they feel, right?
Yes.
So those are the main ways that we can measure adoption, and also reporting, and whatever software you choose needs to have robust reporting in order to understand, is it working or not?
Exactly. We'll come to that point at the end because the data proves everything, right? So, and without the data, we can't really measure anything. So I agree with that 100%. And maybe that brings us to the point, because we've seen a lot of this, let's say, self-service adoption and the digitalization which has been accelerated, especially over the last year as a result of the impact of COVID. So what have you seen, Megan, around that in terms of how customers are actually reacting and adopting a self-adoption approach?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I come out of technical writing. So, 20 years ago, I was writing these big, massive manuals that we really wrote them to be accurate, but we knew that no one was ever going to look at them, right? We just knew that they were going to sit on the shelf and go nowhere. And then we kind of moved forward and eventually moved into a dynamic HTML where we were like, oh, people might actually use this. Super. Now we've enabled people to use it. But we found that a lot of times we were sort of trained to hate self-service. And what I mean by that is anyone who's basically older than a millennial probably has had some terrible, terrible experiences, whether it's with the self-service phone systems or, I don't know, robots that don't quite do what they're supposed to, chatbots that don't answer your questions, things like that. So we've had a lot of terrible experiences. And so that made us not really dive in. Well, today, things have caught up. Technology is so much better than it was even 5 years ago, to the point where you can actually get help through a chatbot. You can actually get help by not contacting a person. And so I think that's really changed today. The one constant that I've seen is that this product content. So remember, I go back to technical writing. I used to write big old manuals that were really boring and dry. Now those things are in a place. Yeah, no, they were really dry, really boring, but they were accurate, right? And they're useful if you actually looked at them. Now those things are online. We all have access to those. And so whether you're in customer support or marketing or customer experience, you have access to these product manuals that are now in this dynamic delivery format that you can sort of tap into. And getting back to what Peter mentioned before about the consistency, it's so important that no matter where your customer comes to self-serve, they get the same answer. And that's super important.
The coherency of the messaging, it really is. And just to finalize on this first section, I love those insights, Megan. What are the benefits? We touched on a few of them just now, and Mike mentioned a few, but let's just drill down on what are the benefits from the customer side and from the vendor side. So first of all, obviously the customer, because the customer comes first. So we talked about speed. We talked about getting the right information at the right time. You mentioned that. What are the other benefits of the customer actually self-adopting? Let's raise this question to you, Mike.
Yeah, I think for a customer, you mentioned a couple of things there that are benefits. I think it's realization, so time to value. That's super important, right?
Yes.
Quicker time to value, time to live is part of that. It's for them, it's just the overarching thing that I think the biggest benefit for customers is really just the experience and puts them in control, right? So I think, when a customer is reliant on a vendor, it just doesn't sometimes or often it doesn't match up, right, with their timeline and with their work hours and things like that. So you lose hours, you lose days, you lose weeks, you get frustrated. So now you're really giving the control back to the customer or to the customer so that they can control their future and their success.
I love that. Master of their own destiny. I love that.
Agreed.
Wonderful. Yes. And what would you add on to that? I know you're in agreement with that, Peter. What have you seen?
It's 100% true. I think from a customer's point of view that the self-serve gives them the control that they maybe didn't realize they needed and wanted. And I think the more they use it, the more they want it. And that's my experience is talking to customers actually we were reluctant at first, but now we're like embracing it and you guys just keep pouring into that. And so we're accelerating our effort around that, partly because the customers are optimistic about our ability to kind of produce the kind of outcomes they expect from a good self-service model. And I think I just want to hammer home on that consistency point of view. That's what Megan's absolutely right. I mean, the technology has improved so much. And in the background, there's a lot of machine learning that's kind of fueling that whole ability to kind of refine the answers or the pointers for customers to go to find the right answers in itself. And so I think, we're just going to see, like exponential increase, I think, in the capabilities there. And that's why I'm pretty confident when I said, I think this should be the default vision for
Yeah,
customer engagement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? That's so powerful, what Peter said. And I think going forward, we need to think about, when we think about the benefits to the vendor and the benefits to the customer, yes, they both benefit. But if you let the vendor benefits drive the project, you're going to fail for the customer. You have to let the customer benefits drive the project, and then the vendor benefits sort of fall out from that.
yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes, it's a natural organic growth, isn't it?
And that's customer centricity right there, the way Megan talked about it. Right?
100%.
It is. I love that. And I think it was interesting as well, because I found some stats as well, recent stats again, which say that 70% of customers now expect a company's website, which is one of the tools, of course, it's not the only tool, to actually include a self-service application.
Yeah. I found one too, Sue. Nuance Enterprise. I was quoted in a HubSpot kind of article that they wrote, and they said 67% of customers want self-service first. Yes. So I was pretty impressed with that number, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for all those people that say, no, our customers don't want to self-serve.
Yeah.
Wrong.
Yeah. And I remember you saying as well, Peter, you had a similar experience. You did a survey, I think.
I did.
Oracle, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I did a big virtual road trip with customers on the phone, just interviewing them for an hour each. It was like 50 or 60 of these people. And one of the questions I asked was, given the choice, how would you want to interact with us? And I was startled. Like every single person said, given the choice, if we think you guys can do it, we'd rather just do it self-serve first. It's not to say your people are bad or poor or unknowledgeable. In fact, they're good, but self-serve would meet our requirements for fast answers to tricky problems. So
fast answers and first time to value, as Mike was saying as well.
That's right.
I think, absolutely. That's great. So we've obviously touched on the customer side, which is the most important, as we said. Now, from the vendor side, what are the advantages from the vendor side? Obviously, saving time, saving money as well. What have you seen you've probably initiated some of your self-adoption processes already. So what are the benefits which you're reaping already as a vendor? Megan, let's start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We love this, of course, because our customers are all vendors. And so we have, for example, we had one particular company that set up self-service using our product, and they started keeping track of all of those cases that came in that should have been able to be answered by content. And when they tracked all of those, they were able to actually reduce 40% of cases just by getting rid of those sort of tier 1 cases, which is really impressive. So I think anytime you're looking at cases, that's dollars, right? That's how much time do you not take from your agents? It's not only dollars, but it's customer experience in the sense that your agents, now that you currently have, if they're spending less time on tier 1, they have more time to spend on tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, right? So you're getting a better customer experience in having those agents respond to all of those cases. So I think those are huge for sure on the vendor side.
It is, absolutely. And then they concentrate on more high added value activities and efforts. I love that. And I saw there was a survey on that, which I think it was Accenture that said that in fact every call it costs like $11. So it's the $11 saving per call.
It's a lot.
Right.
It's a lot, right?
Yeah, and it depends on your company. There are companies where every call costs $1,000, right? There are companies where it might cost $2, right? It just depends on your company. So I think 11 seems low to me, actually, in a really technical environment.
Yeah, I think it was an average that they'd actually put out there. But yes, so definitely savings. Mike, what other advantages have you seen, since you've been implementing this self-adoption approach?
Yeah, Megan and Peter both touched on this, but standardization of answers, right? I think people live in a world where the answer changes quickly as software develops, right? And so you need to get the right answer at the moment. to your customers. And so that's a value to actually the customer, but also the vendor. And if you could show ROI, like Megan talked about, in a perfect world, that means you can spend that money elsewhere.
Yeah.
In your department, right? Maybe there's other software you want. Maybe there's other things that you can spend that budget on. And then job satisfaction for the CSMs. You touched on it, but
Yes.
not having to be the knowledge hub, not being an extension of support. In a lot of ways is they're able to be elevated and do the job that they were hired to do and that they love to do. And so the job satisfaction is there once you can get self-service adoption in place.
I love that.
I love that.
I think I'd just add, Sue, to the other comments is from the vendor's point of view is scale. I mean, it allows you, it's pretty obvious, but I think it's important to point out. I mean, doing self-serve really well allows you to really scale in a big way, especially if you focus on refining it all the time. And then more invisible, I would say, is the opportunity of data that gets surfaced through all those interactions that should fuel an effort to improve the customer's experience overall and longer term. So you just learn lessons through all the interactions. And obviously that's not something that can be done by an individual. It's more like a machine kind of approach. But I think that's important to point out for the benefits of self-serve for the vendors, this rich data that can be surfaced.
Yeah. Data. And I think it's, as you say, it takes a village, right, to do all that. It's not just one team, it's everybody. To really drive that voice of the customer program internally. Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, thank you for these insights, which actually brings us to the second topic, which is now, it's more about the how to implement a self-adoption approach. So there are lots of things which you can think of. I think the obvious one is the tools. But before we get to the tools, first of all, what are the kinds of differences in setting expectations with customers so they actually embrace a self-service product adoption approach? So Mike, can we start with you on this question, please?
Yeah, so how do you set expectations with customers to embrace self-service? That's an interesting one, right? Because there's a component of change management, both with the customer and internally, and that's super important. To Peter's point, and I did learn this at Oracle, if you give them no other option but to use self-service first, that changes things, right? And for a CSM to do that or customer facing, sometimes that's tough. And I know I'm overstating that, Peter, that's not exactly what happens, but
it was pretty close.
It works, right? And just because they don't like it at first, they do grow to love it. And so that's one way to do it. There's the obvious one where that you can really explain the value prop to them during the onboarding process. And that, hey, if you want your answer faster, if you want more control over your future with us, and time to value, then this is the way to go. So those are the two main ways that I think you can.
That's really interesting. And just out of curiosity, is that communication, is that during the onboarding process, or is there already some kind of communication up front, even before, just to set those expectations with customers, perhaps even before they've signed?
It depends. I think to some extent, we leave it to the sales team and they can decide if it's going to help them close a deal or not.
Yeah,
or potentially it's a landmine for the competitors, right? We have great self-service, do they? Right? So we do leave it up to the sales team, and from time to time they will bring it in as a benefit and a differentiator for us.
Yeah, that could be a tricky one sometimes. I agree. Yes. Great. Okay. And what have you seen, Peter, for that as well in terms of?
Yeah. So I like how Mike described it. That's kind of the heavy lift of communicating. You really have to think really, thoroughly about what impact, what has the best ability for impacting customers and communicating properly, and that they're going to absorb it and understand. And that's all important. What we did at Oracle a few years ago when we really were announcing or launching a new kind of self-serve platform. And that's those interviews I did in advance of that to kind of soften the community a little bit. I wasn't announcing anything. I was just kind of getting their sense. And then I think that helped Mark Hurd was the CEO at the time, and he made a big play of it. He did a whole press release on the self-serve. He announced it at our open world. It was like a big splash. So customers, to Mike's point, it was on them. You know, it was a little challenging because a lot of them didn't want that. So there was a whole, what I call a culture challenge for us, for our customers, with our customers. We had a lot of tough conversations, I think, just to be honest about it.
I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up, that those initial interviews not only serve to teach you about what your customer wants, but they also serve to kind of teach the customer that change is coming. And so that's a really great way to use that. I actually did that back. So I was a Zoomin customer a couple times. And at one of the companies, I did that same thing, reach out to customers, talk to them, have them be a part of the process. So by the time we launched, they were over the moon, right? Because they felt like they were a part of the process. And even if they weren't, they knew what was coming. So I think that's super, super important. I wanted to add one other thing, if you don't mind.
Yes,
Sue.
go ahead.
Going back to what Mike said about sort of forcing them down the channel of self-service, I think it's important to find the appropriate level of friction to entering a case, right? So you don't want to piss them off. You don't want to make them so angry because they can't get to the case when they know they need to put in a case. But you need to put in enough friction to make them go, well, maybe I don't need to put in a case. Maybe I just need, maybe this content will help me. And then at the end of the day, your self-service has to work. If they do it once and it doesn't work, you may have lost them on self-service until you put a bunch of energy into it. So make sure that your self-service is working.
It's effortless. Yeah, has to be. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I love what you were saying, about the implication of your customers in that. That is the rule number one, isn't it? In order to get the adhesion and the change management. So I love that. It actually brings us on to the question of the tools. What are the kinds of tools which you can put into place in order to drive a self-service approach? So let's start with you, Megan, on that. What are the different types of tools which you have seen and which you are using?
Yeah, so I'm a little biased because, of course, I work for Zoomin and this is what we do. So, but I can tell you what our customers are looking for typically. And the tools can be a documentation portal that is hyper-personalized and unified across all of your content sources. It could be they're in Salesforce entering a case and you want to be able to serve up content right then and there. It could be inside your product. You have a little chatbot that provides the right documentation at the right time. I think what I would say generally is that, again, going back to consistency, if you have 3 different teams building those 3 different portals or doors to your content, they're going to have 3 different answers. And we did this. So I worked at Amazon and I was supporting the sellers at Amazon, and we did this customer trust index. And the customer trust index is one where it was very geeky and data oriented and very Amazon, right? And we had 13 different questions that all aimed at customer trust under 4 pillars: accuracy, helpfulness, consistency, and engagement. And the big loser by far, like hands down, was customer trust was busted by consistency. And so we were able to look at that and figure out that the snippets that we were writing based on the help content, once we put that into the tool that the agents were using, those agents were gold on their CSAT score for their response. So that encouraged them to change the answer. So now they're sending an answer out that doesn't necessarily match our help content. And that right there busted the trust. So I think it's so important to bring all of the content in from one place and push the exact same content out no matter where it is. So you have one place to publish it, one place where it gets edited, and it goes out to any door your customer comes through.
That is key, isn't it? It's fast and also the consistency. I think that's the top 2. You were going to add something to that as well, Peter, in terms of.
I would just, that's so important to point out the one location so that way you address the consistency issue. But you like some variety too. So you have the portal, you push content to people too. And one pretty obvious thing to do is webinars. So one to many, right? You just put some good content out there, and then the customers will come. And we're doing that more and more. We're enjoying really good uplift on that for customer success in various parts of the globe, especially Latin America seems to be like going crazy there with a lot of really great uptake from customers on webinars. And we're getting a little bit better with that in North America, but we're optimistic that's a really good vehicle for reaching a lot of customers who don't even have CSMs. And so that's a way for us to scale really inexpensively, I would say, so that's I wrote down a couple of notes, so portals and knowledge base and pushing content. So luckily we have a pretty good kind of marketing expertise within our organization. So we're directing some of that energy towards figuring out how to kind of get better at pushing, customer marketing, basically.
Yes.
So,
well, it's customer nurturing, isn't it? So a lot of those marketing skills are very helpful for that. Yeah. Absolutely. And Mike, just on that note and the tools, have you seen how those tools are actually perceived by the customers, those different tools? And do you have any stats around their popularity and what works best, perhaps?
Well, I would say that, Zoomin is a great example of personalizing the experience, right? And that gets back to really knowing who your customer is and the persona. So there's work you have to do before you get to a tool and before you get to a strat. And these are just mistakes that I've made. So kind of lessons learned here where I thought I could just build it and then they'll come, and it didn't happen. I built it, nobody came, and it wasn't helpful. So you really have to know the customer personas and build a self-service experience for them. It could be in product, it could be a dev hub, right, for the engineers, and you have to speak their language. I think robust reporting is what Megan touched on.
Yes.
And a customer feedback tool so that you can understand what's working and what's not, and you can do that via NPS and there are a bunch of different type of methodologies to get customer feedback. And then as far as, this isn't really a tool, but I didn't realize that I would need cross-functional partners to get this done. And maybe that's definitely naive of me. I thought, we could just build it. I own support. Let's just build it and roll it out. It'll be great. Not true. You need marketing, you need product, you need support, you need services, you need executives, you need, so you need all of that in order to make it work. And so that's what I've learned. I don't know if I answered your question, but I answered a question.
Yes, it was about the tools, the impact of the tools, and the lessons learned around that. So yes, you did.
I think that's a really good point, Mike, about the cross functionality of it, right? You have your tool. Let's say your tool is Salesforce, and let's say Peter's using a doc portal, and I have something else going on, and the product team has in product. You have to get together and talk about these things. And I can't tell you the number of times I've seen where a support org would say, no, we're going to write our own stuff. Or a marketing team would say, we're going to write our own tech content. And it never is a good customer experience if you don't get together with all the people that are already writing that content. So so important.
Well, I think it reflects. Sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I was just going to add to Megan. I mean, if you keep that as your North Star, it becomes easier to kind of get the right people together all the time.
Right.
Everyone just has to keep that in mind. It's all about the customer experience, right?
Yes. And it indeed, as you said, all of you, it really does take a village to get there. Yeah. And just to wrap up on this second section, I think it would be just very nice to have some insights, because I think we're talking about obviously this cross-functional alignment. What does it take on the vendor side in order to manage this? Because, we're talking about different mindsets. So that implies that, there are different skill sets which are needed. So what have you seen in terms of how you are ramping up your teams to keep up to speed?
Tricky one. Do you want me to answer?
Yes. By default, it's you.
I want to offer Mike Sasaki another job back at Oracle, because we have people, but I think you need leadership that has a strong, not just an appreciation, but an excitement about data. I think so that you can kind of help people understand how critical it is for customers that they're served back to what we said at the beginning,
Mhm.
the opportunity to kind of get information that's consistent and reliable, all that kind of wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
And that means you really have to have a data-driven culture. And I think the leaders need to kind of model that, in many, many ways. And that's where the culture change has to kind of be addressed. I think is you can go outside and hire a bunch of people from Amazon like Megan, but or you can help your people, your leaders grow, right? And I think people by and large, if they're introduced to concepts, they'll pick up on that stuff and they'll learn themselves how to become better coaches and plug themselves into this kind of digital kind of world that we're really racing through at this point. I was going to say we're rushing to, we're actually there. We're just racing more and more all the time, right?
Trying to keep up, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting you bring up data and the idea of scaling. Obviously, you have to be data driven. What I find is that there are a lot of folks that don't really understand what that means. And so they'll grasp for any data they have, and then they'll make these sweeping decisions based on one little data point. And sometimes that's not the right way to go either, right? You have to have trend lines over time. You have to really take this piece of data and this piece of data and say, how do these things come together and really create good insights out of the data?
That's
and
right.
You have to have appropriate data to be able to making your decisions. So I know in Amazon, we use data a lot, but in sort of the rest of the world that I've been in, data is sort of, we try and get as much data as we can. And so we just need to be very, very cautious to use it as a signal and maybe a North Star watching the trend lines over time, as opposed to drop everything because the data says this.
Yeah, that's fair to say. I mean, I think what's missing from what I was talking about really is the data analysis piece. And that's so critical, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And you probably have data analysts and, BI people that's their job, right?
Yeah.
So for smaller companies, it's a little bit more challenging for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's key, and having this data-driven approach, it really is, again, it's a change in mindset.
Yep.
And of course, with the technology, it's more readily available. But how do we adapt to that? As you said, we're trying to keep up with everything. It's happening so quickly. Just to finish perhaps on this as well, and we touched on it very briefly before, but the fact that we're actually putting in self-adoption processes means that that's actually, let's say, relieving some of the time, which, especially if you're CSM or a client facing role, that you have more time, in fact, to do more added value activities. So what are you seeing since you've actually put those processes into place? What are you seeing that your teams are now actually being able to do, which they weren't able to do before? Is it too soon to say that, or have you actually seen anything concrete?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen our customer-facing teams being more, and this is kind of an overused word, but more proactive with their customers, and being more consultative. It's hard to have that, consultative engagement when you are just in the weeds, firefighting, and pushing tickets along and things like that, and being a knowledge hub, right, as a CSM. So that's been great. Another piece that's important, going back to your original or your previous question, is we brought in a data analyst on our customer success team, and we're hoping to grow that team out, because I was getting really tired of having to borrow the resource of the data team. And the data team doesn't always know the customers, right? So now we have a dedicated data analyst that really knows our customers and what the pain points are. So I can go to this team and ask them questions and not give them answers and try and find data to support my answer. It's really just, what do we need to do here? And then they go in and tell me what we should do. And it's been really helpful. So that's what I've seen, is more of a consultative engagement due to self-service. And that's just going to keep trending in the right direction, hopefully.
And greater employee satisfaction as a consequence, as we mentioned. Absolutely. Yes. Brilliant. Oh, well, I love all those insights. So thank you. And this brings us to the last grand finale section, which is a little bit of reflection about how you're actually measuring the impact of all those self-adoption processes that you've put into place. So first of all, how are you assessing the impact with your customers? What have you put into place? What kind of metrics have you put into place to measure whether or not these self-adoption programs are actually working, right? So who would like to answer that? I won't always go to you, Megan, as the first one. So maybe we could start off with Peter on this one.
Sure. So in terms of customer success, we're not really at this point yet, in terms of programmatically, I would say, getting feedback from customers specifically about their use of self-service is more of a observing, CSM's anecdotal kind of feedback. We can, to Megan's point, you can get data and kind of correlate it yourself and try and tell a story that you want to tell.
Yeah.
So we could say, oh, this is great because we can connect these dots between, reduced SRs and maybe an increase in NPS, and we can kind of say, hey, look, self-service works. That's not 100% true, right? I mean, you really have to almost ask the customer, 6 months ago, how did you feel about self-service? And now, how do you feel about self-service?
Yeah.
Without telling them you just poured $2 million into that initiative and tried to refine it.
Yeah.
So I think we have a ways to go, I think, in customer success to really gauge how our customers are perceiving that. But I think on the support side, they're better at that because they've got a longer history of actually, like all support organizations do, of surveying customers almost too much. And so I think they're getting better. We have a new leader in place, and he's got this real kind of customer excellence mindset and really focused on the experience a lot and trying to meld together support and success a lot. And so I really like his views. And one of the things he's really focused on is better surveying, more insightful kind of questions for the customers, like, okay, oh, that made me think, that kind of stuff. So I'm optimistic that they probably got, I'm optimistic because I don't know the real answer. I think we probably have good data to show that it's picking up.
Well, again, I mean, we've been talking a lot about data, but again, it's a whole new set of data, which you probably didn't have before, but as a consequence of putting in these new processes, right? So, that's something which doesn't happen overnight, right? Okay, great. Well, good insights there. Megan, I'll let you answer that now, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So finding the right data is a journey. It's not something where you just set it up at the beginning of the program and you're done, right? But I like to think of the 3 different types of data. So one would be perception data. That would be the voice of the customer, the qualitative. It might be quantitative, but really, how does my customer feel about my product and how do they feel they're doing with my product? Then there's behavioral. What are they actually doing with it?
Right.
Are they, engaged in it? Are they using it? Are they not using it? That kind of thing. And then there's the outcomes. So are they actually able to finish what they intended to finish based on the product? And so that last one is very, very, very difficult to capture, right? How do you capture that a customer did indeed do what they intended to do when you don't really have insight into what they intended to do, and you might not even have insight into what they actually did. So sort of as a proxy for that, you kind of have to use the other 2 and put them together and create insights and really kind of believe what they're saying. So I think there's a journey where you start with perception data, you start with voice of the customer, you start really understanding how are they doing with my product. When you start to see issues, you drive programs throughout your organization to say, oh, we got to fix this, this, and this. And then you watch the perception go up. Then you start looking at behavior. And once you kind of have that perception under control, then the behavior becomes sort of the North Star. We want to make sure that they feel great about doing it. And we also want to drive engagement or adoption or whatever it is you're trying to drive. And then if you're at a place like Oracle or Amazon, then you get to the outcome side and really, figure out, are they actually doing what we intended them to do? So
right. I love that. And you need both. And I love this way that you're actually correlating all these different triggers, right? In terms of data to make that correlation and analysis. That's wonderful. And Mike, I'd like to ask you, because you were talking about the fact, and I know you've put this robust onboarding process into place. And do you have data already around this self-adoption onboarding process, around the first time to value, which actually says that they're actually gaining that first time to value earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Peter, $2 million invested sounds pretty good. I'm very jealous of
I just threw that out there. I don't know.
so I would say about self-service, it's a key part of many programs, right? It doesn't just do one thing. And so in order to measure it, you kind of have to look at what part of that program it is. So in the case of onboarding, it's a key part of our onboarding program, and we do it in the way of a dev hub. And so we can measure the time to live, the time to value. Now those are metrics that are important, but there's a quality metric that is important as well. So we want to hit those two, but we also want to hit, their revenue goals. There's what we call successful in production as well. And so I think self-service plays into that as well, as it plays a key part of those programs. So it really depends on the goal of that piece of self-service. We look at support ticket counts. I mean, that's important too, and KB article effectiveness, CSAT, NPS, things like that. So those are the metrics that probably don't surprise anyone on this webinar that we're looking at to determine, whether or not it's working.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember you saying that your NPS, that's pretty recent, right? That's not something you've been measuring for a long time. So that's interesting as well, right?
Yeah, I love NPS. I know it's controversial, potentially to say that.
We love talking about NPS, yes.
Yeah, there's a bunch of NPS haters for good reason, but you got to find the survey that works for you and your customers and gives you.
Yeah, I think if it's done well, it works, Mike. Yeah, I agree.
I think it's funny when anyone hates any form of data. It's like any form of data can be used or abused or misused, right? So if you use it for what it's good for, then it's great. If you're trying to use it to make those massive decisions, then you're not using it right. So,
or if you don't use it at all, right? I've seen NPS programs where you get the feedback and then
it's bad and you don't close the loop, right? Yes.
A vanity metric, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like all data, right? You have to measure it and act upon it, right? Otherwise, there's no point in having it in the first place. Absolutely. Right. So just to come to the end, well, not the end, but near towards the end, can you give us an example, each of you, of how you've actually evolved your self-service program recently? What kind of actions have you put into place? So Megan, maybe we can start off with you on that one. Throw a spanner in there, yes?
Yes. So how have we evolved our self-service? So I'm trying to think of the most important piece. I think it really is, for us, it's about bringing content up at the right time. And again, this is my bias because of who I work for, but it really is all about product content, and product content answers most of your questions. And so we've really focused on how do we surface that product content wherever the customer comes. So if they're coming through the support channel, surface the content there. If they're coming inside the product, surface the content right there. So I think that's probably the biggest impact we've had in terms of being able to self-serve, because customers, you don't want them hopping around to try and figure out where they need to go. Whatever door they're coming through, give them the content right there. Right. And again, have it be consistent.
Fantastic. That's great. And how about you, Mike?
Yeah, I would say, that the way we've evolved, or I've evolved, I'll touch on both. So self-service that improves the customer experience can't just be a one org mission, right? Needs to be company-wide. And with that in mind, internally, the inclusion of different partners and orgs and leaders is super important. And that's something that was new to me. I didn't do that before, as I touched on earlier. And then interlocking the different cross-functional groups, depending on the use case. For example, if we're going to put out release notes, then there's a different role that each group needs to play, and they need to be aware of that role, and there needs to be clarity and timing, and you have to do all this work, right, to get that detail nailed down, because it's easy to get a high level agreement. Yeah, you will participate in release notes, and then you go and you start doing that process, following that process, and product has another priority, right, or support has another priority. So you really have to spend the time there. And I did mention this before, but just the fact that I thought building a great customer portal would be everything, and it's not. You need to really put the customer first and understand their persona, and how
Yeah.
they want to consume information and where they want to consume information, whether it's in product or on your website or both, or however, however they want to consume it, you have to understand. So
Yeah.
that's really how I've evolved my thinking around self-service and customer enablement.
And I love that persona approach. I'm a big fan of that. So that's fantastic. And Peter, just to finish on that question.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've been at it for a while, probably a couple of years, but I think we're doubling down on the effort now of offering to customers just through the portal the ability to kind of assess themselves. It's not for all of our products, but some products, and so they can download an assessment kind of exercise and measure themselves. And it's not as scientific, or I shouldn't say it's not as sophisticated as like a true benchmarking kind of exercise you would do with a consultant, but it's not bad. I mean, it's better than not knowing. And so it's based on science that we have looked at other customers, and we've come up with these measurements so people can score themselves against. And that's been good, I think, for the customers who've done it. So
Very cool.
Yeah, that's
Love that.
great. And to be able to perhaps benchmark themselves as well, because that
That's
creates
right.
extra competition or kind of sense of motivation, I would suppose. Yes.
And how they need
Yeah.
to improve. Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Yeah, I remember that, Peter, at Oracle. That's really, really great. I'm sure there's a different formats of that.
It is different now, but yeah, we
Yeah.
were doing it for a while. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
It's a great tool, and it leads to the right conversations with
Yes.
customers.
that's right.
That's awesome. We might steal that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
It's a bit of work.
Put some copyrights down there, Peter, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So just to finalize, and then we'll go on to the questions. Could each of you just very quickly, please, just say what are the top 2 lessons that you've learned and which you would recommend others to do in order to put a self-adoption approach into place? Megan, let's start with you, please.
Number 1, make sure everything's consistent across all your channels. Number
Yeah.
2, I'm going to steal Mike's, which is be cross-functional about it. Don't try and just do yours and have them do theirs, because the customer will lose in that scenario. So
Okay.
bring it all together across functions.
It's a village. Fantastic. Thank you. And Mike?
Yeah, don't tackle this on your own in a silo. Include other orgs. Understand the personas. I think I've said that
Yes.
quite a bit today, but it's super important.
Yeah.
And it's not set it and forget it, right? It's
Yeah.
set it, look at the data, iterate. You need to make sure that the different orgs know that they need to update their piece of the documentation timely. And often, it's probably the lowest thing on their priority, but you need that buy-in early on and throughout in order to make it work.
Absolutely. It needs to be top down. I absolutely agree. And you have the final word, Peter, for that.
Sure. I think I would say check with customers, create a focus group as you're doing this to gauge their opinions on what they're seeing, because there needs to be a bit of design element thinking into what you're presenting for them to self-serve. You want the experience to be good, so take it seriously. I know it can be, it can lengthen the project, but I think that'll be well worth it to check with the customers. If you're not going to hire an outside consultant who's going to really help design it, then check with the customers and they'll give you ideas. And then secondly, I would just say, without the leadership endorsement, like the executive leadership, this is going to fail. You got to really get that in place.
It is. It's a cultural pillar because it is a mindset, as we said it, previously. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for those recommendations. That's great insights. We just have a few minutes now left for some questions from the participants. So I'm looking at these. They've been voted up. So the first one that we have here is from Yim Noble. Sorry, Yim Noble. That's the correct pronunciation. So Yim is asking, if you have a product that is still somewhat complex to learn, what are your thoughts on how to start shifting the balance of vendor-led versus self-service adoption? So who would like to take that one?
Well,
I'll take that one.
Oh, go ahead, Megan.
Okay. Yes.
I'm preaching the same thing again.
Yes.
Your technical writers and your training teams are already dealing with the complexity. So they know how to sift through that complexity and put it into writing or put it into videos or put it into wherever you need. So work with them to make sure that you're getting that content and that you're sending it out in the appropriate channel. So if I don't know where Yim is, but let's say Yim is leading a customer support organization. If they're using a CRM tool, make sure that when someone types in a question that you are surfacing all of that great product content and training content and the other content that's already been created so that they can find it.
Okay,
Nice.
wonderful. Did you want to add to that as well, Peter?
I was going to say something similar, that we have a team of subject matter experts within our organization that kind of between the product teams and the CSM. So they provide a little bit more insights for the CSMs to make them more actionable in front of customers. And we're trying to get them to produce short videos and maybe some written content and stuff like that we can put out there that helps prime people who are using more complex products. I think the way I think of it is that you almost have to put thought leadership stuff out there first, so they start developing the right kind of approaches. You're not going to get too technical with people and too specific around processes if you can't sit down with them. It's really hard to do that through self-serve.
I agree. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Now, the next question is from Michael Giordano. Sorry for my hopeless pronunciation. So he's asking, can you share some real examples of broad-based, customizable and technical products that have been successful with adoption of self-service? It seems that you need an army of people to keep source documentation content relevant and up to date as products change. So, Mike, do you want to have a bash at that one?
Yeah, I don't think it's binary, right? It's not all self-service or not at all self-service, right? So there are complexities to every product. I think a lot of people think their software product is complex and potentially self-service won't work, right? I was thinking about, what I think about our own products. So I think you need to identify what parts are really complex and what parts you can serve through self-service, and get started and see if that's right. And potentially that's right, and you can build off of it. If it's wrong, then you would iterate, right? So I think that's really an important piece. And if you don't have an army of people, then that's where we're at MyTech. We don't have an army of people. You need to be realistic about what you can keep up to date and make sure that you start small and you do keep that piece up to date and really good, and then you can build off of it, get some wins.
I love that.
I would give an example. I know he asked for a specific technical product. If you look at ServiceNow, they do a tremendous job of really whittling down very technical information into a very understandable way. And they have things, they have a lot of different versions of their tool, and they've got different models that you have to use within each version. And so they've done a tremendous job. So you might look at them. And I do know, just because I know them, that they are in structured content and they do a lot with their product content. So
great example. Thank you, Megan, for that. So we still have probably time for the last question. This time it's from Chris King, who's saying, this is such a great topic. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. As we see onboarding become more self-serve for the benefit of the customer, what role does the vendor CSM play in the inevitable transition of customer ownership team from implementation to the live team? Because many times the challenge is the customer isn't well prepared for that transition. So change management question here. Who would like to have a bash at that one?
Sure, I'll take a run at it. So I think some of it depends on data flow.
Yeah.
So this is a 1,000-year-old problem, but getting organizations to input the right data for the customer that they're going to need further along the process after you've gone. I think that's critical. And I always bring it home to leadership, making sure that this happens as part of a process. So we're trying to get really better at passing information that the CSMs need to know all the way through the customer's life cycle. So that's become, it's programmatic now. It's part of our CRM. And so CSMs are starting to operate from data that the sales team is actually inputting now, which is, wow, amazing. So that's how I think of it. It's not the only answer. I think that the challenge also becomes getting the customer positioned well before go live, so that they know what to expect after go live. There's all this communication that needs to happen, and you can do it. Obviously, the best way is human to human, but it's not always possible. So you can nurture people along the way with what to expect. As they move through the implementation period, this is what's going to happen in 2 months' time, and get ready and all this kind of stuff.
That's all so important. And on top of that, make sure you're getting voice of the customer across the entire journey. So if your customers are really happy in the sales process, then they land in onboarding and they're really frustrated, that's a big signal that you have an issue with that handoff. If they're going through implementation happy as a clam, but then getting frustrated with the CSM, then you might have an issue with that handoff. So use that perception data to really home into where the problem handoffs are.
I love that. Yeah.
Where the bottlenecks. Yes. And it all is about communication, right? Throughout, up front and throughout. Wonderful. Unfortunately, I see that the time is up. So I'm sorry for those that had all the questions for which we were not able to answer. But thank you, everybody. Thank you to our AHA panelists. You were absolutely wonderful. Thank you to all the participants. And of course, as we said at the beginning, this is an ongoing thought leadership series. So you're welcome for all the participants that came today to join the next one. So look out for those. Thank you to everybody, and we'll see you all very soon. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.